everybody. Welcome, first of all, to New York, and welcome to AgMIP9, a global workshop modeling the future of food. So you see, see that little QR code. Be sure to scan it and keep track of the agenda. We have such an amazing agenda for the next 3 days of the All Together workshop. And then we also have another set of wonderful side events. We started yesterday with 9 side events that were absolutely fantastic. We're going to hear report backs from them on Wednesday morning. So everybody knows what's going on with all parts of AgMIP. So keep track of the agenda with the QR code. So first, we want to thank the donors for AgMIP9. Columbia Climate School, as you can see here, we are at Columbia. We're at that Columbia Climate School hosts the coordinating unit of AgMIP. So thank you very much to the whole school. And we have a representative who's going to be giving our lead keynote, Jessica Fansel. And they particularly are hosting the reception that we're having this evening. Cornell University, Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, otherwise known as PIC. I was practicing my German. Technische Universität München. How is it? What? Okay. It's because I did a sabbatical in Austria at JASA. TUM, otherwise known as TUM. USDA, great support from both the Economic Research Service as well as the Agricultural Research Service. CSIRO in Australia, of course, our home agency, and Kathy Hibbert is here at NASA, our new program manager at NASA is here for the entire week. And then finally, the middle one, the AgMIP World Food Prize Fund. So it's a really special honor for me that the funds from the World Food Prize are contributing to AgMIP9 from the prize last year. Thank you. All right, thanks to the donors. Now, this is how AgMIP, you're going to be learning, a lot of people know how AgMIP works. There are a lot of moving parts and moving pedals that we're going to be showing. But the way that AgMIP works on a monthly, bi-weekly, sometimes weekly basis is with the executive committee. So we have some of the members here, and Eric will see if some of the members are online. And everyone gets to, you're going to hear a word of welcome from, starting with Sentol Aseng. And this is also so so engage with these people. If there's something you want to do, it doesn't have to be just Alex and me. We want to, get with with your executive committee as well. Sentol. Yeah. Oh no, just there is fine.
Hi everyone, I'm Sentol Aseng. I know this technical.
Oh no, you better come. Yep, better come. Do we have carrying mics? Maybe. Oh, there's a carrying mic too. Okay, here we go.
Try here again. Maybe you can hear me better. So hi, I'm Sentol Aseng. I'm now with the Technical University of München, Technische Universität München, as you try. Very good.
All right, we're practicing.
Welcome everyone. It's really great to see so many familiar faces, but I think it's also really great to see so many new faces and a lot of young people here. I think AgMIP is alive, AgMIP9 is really alive, and I wish you all the best and a lot of interaction. I'm really looking forward to talk to many of you over the next days. Enjoy AgMIP9.
Wonderful, thank you, Sentol. What's up with Geeta? Is Geeta? She's not. No. Okay, all right, we have just to share that Geeta Lakshmi is on the executive committee from Tamil Nadu in India. Mario, you're up. 1 minute of welcome.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Mario Herrero from Cornell University. I've been involved in AgMIP since its inception. So it's great to see so many known faces and old colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, I think that we need to really. This is very timely. It's a very timely meeting. We need to really move the agenda forward a lot. We have pressing issues in our world, and we need this kind of collaboration to really start solving these deep, complex problems. So it's great to see so many committed people to the cause. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Herman.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Herman Lotze-Kampen. I'm from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. My first AgMIP meeting was in San Antonio. Was that AgMIP 1 or 2? Two. Okay. And I have been co-chairing the Global Economics Group for many years now. We also have a side session on Friday. Yeah, I mean, welcome to the new normal. I mean, we are all here, that's great, but remember, a lot of people are also online, which is also great, actually. I think it's a great opportunity. I know it's quite an issue for people who plan these events, because in the end, you never know who will show up in the end, right? So I think this is great, but let's also pay attention during the workshop all the time that, you know, we get the people online involved. On topics, I would stress two issues. I would really look forward to discussing adaptation, mitigation, and sustainable issues across the whole value chain, you know, the whole agro-food system, and with a specific aspect on synergies between adaptation and mitigation, which is also increasingly interesting, challenging, and yeah, I'm looking forward to all the discussions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Herman. Laura, please. Great. Laura Tal, please.
Thank you. I am Laure Tal. I'm research director in a think tank based in Senegal, and we do policy work. So my presence here is a sign that AgMIP is really enlarging and embracing its vocation of giving decision tools to policymakers. So thank you again, and please be free to discuss this policy matter. And I think that the next working group, which should be policy.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent. All right. Very good.
Good morning, everyone. Anthony Whitbread. I'm working for ILRI, International Livestock Research Institute. I'm a program leader for a program called Sustainable Livestock Systems. I've been involved with AgMIP since, I think, 2014, when I led a big phase of work that was well funded back in those days for ICRISAT. Yeah, my objective is to really bring the developing world perspective to our discussions, and particularly getting the CGIAR perspective on how we bring climate change, adaptation and mitigation forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony. Now we want to tell you about the AgMIP Steering Council, because this is our group of very senior, terrific leaders in the field beyond AgMIP, who come together to advise AgMIP on going forward. So first of all, a big thanks to all the members of the AgMIP Steering Council, and you can see their photos and names and I think bios online. But I want to, Martin Balwaya is not with us today from NEPAD, but Morven McLean, the co-chair of the Steering Council, is here, and just want to introduce her. She's Director of Global Strategy, Regulatory and Public Affairs at Bill and Melinda Gates Agricultural Innovations, that's known as the Gates AgMIP1. This is a nonprofit dedicated to ensuring high quality, cutting edge crop innovations are available and accessible to those who need them most. Morven is an agricultural scientist with more than 20 years experience developing and implementing applied agricultural research and capacity building programs. Doesn't this sound like AgMIP? Yes, we're so pleased. I'm so pleased to introduce Morven for a few words from the Steering Council, from the AgMIP Steering Council.
Thank you, Cynthia. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. On behalf of the AgMIP Steering Council, I welcome you to the fully hybrid 9th AgMIP Global Workshop. At the heart of AgMIP are the network members, the 200 plus who are with us in person today and also online, and the more than 1,000 members across the AgMIP network. Welcome to all of you. From its inception in 2010, AgMIP has been at the forefront of improving the rigor of agricultural models and thus strengthening the evidence base for decision-making on climate change and food systems at regional, national, and global scale. Now, AgMIP's at the cusp of a crucially important new phase as the world emerges from COVID and climate change literally heats up. As the conflict in Ukraine has shown us, shocks are hitting the food system from all quarters. To help set the course for AgMIP over the next 10 years, the AgMIP Steering Council will be meeting throughout AgMIP9. The overall goal is to advance AgMIP's critical role in the science, stakeholder, and policy space, which is really required to be able to respond to these challenges. The Steering Council will advise on how to strengthen AgMIP's structure and function. We're going to be conducting a foresight analysis looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and also setting funding strategies to ensure the sustainability of this incredibly important organization. Steering Council members, as Cynthia has already mentioned, will also be participating in sessions throughout the week, so please get to know them. And if I could, I'd actually like to ask our Steering Council members to stand up so you can actually put faces. So if you're on the Steering Council, if you could please stand up. Thank you. And for those Steering Council members who are online, maybe you can identify yourself in the chat as well. So moving forward, the Steering Council is going to be playing key roles as shepherds of AgMIP activities and will be reporting back during the final plenary. In short, we are here to support you and all of the work that you do. So thank you for your participation, not just in the AgMIP9 this week, but also in all of the essential AgMIP activities and teams, and wishing you a really productive AgMIP9 Global Workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Marvin. And now we're turning to, okay, what are we doing here together? Here are the objectives for the workshop, and this we're going to Alex Ruane and I are going to be explaining the agenda briefly. So there are 6 workshop objectives for AgMIP9: improve models and integrated assessments. That's like core business of AgMIP. Utilize new tools to address food system challenges. We can't just use the same old tools. Constantly, what are the new tools bringing in? Everything across the whole world now has to enhance inclusion, equity, and justice. We need to do our part in food system modeling. That's the 3rd objective. The 4th, synergize adaptation and mitigation along the value chain. ExecCom members mentioned this. We used to focus more on adaptation, but now really we are very deep in the mitigation space and side of climate change challenges as well. AgMIP is definitely doing that. But then we need to broaden and deepen collaborations for the future of food, land, and health. I'm looking at Mario, who's going to be leading that plenary. And then finally, really speaking to what Morven was really just bringing forward, is to strengthen science, stakeholder, and policy linkages for future systems. So for each one of these objectives, there is a plenary session here at AgMIP9. And those consist of 1 or 2 keynotes, and then a panel led by an executive committee member, and with wonderful participation, some in person, some virtual, around these key topics. So we can really delve in and deepen our discussion, as well as really planning ways forward. So that's the brief overview of what we're really doing here specifically this week. With this, I want to introduce Alex Ruane, who is really the co-local lead of AgMIP9 from the coordinating unit. And you're in AgMIP, his role as Alex, you probably know every single person in this room because Alex is the science coordinator for AgMIP. So Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Cynthia. So we know many people have traveled a long distance and some have traveled a long time to even go a short distance to get here. It was a little bit of a chaotic day for some air travel yesterday. But we want to first acknowledge the incredible diversity and experience and expertise that's in the room. So some of you may know that at the AgMIP meetings in New York, we hand out AgMIP hats. So we're going to use that as a device here to see who's in the room. So we know people have multiple types of expertise, but we would ask people who primarily identify as a climate expert to please raise your hand. I see one, a couple more. Okay, people, there we go. So we're going to be handing out these sky blue climate hats with the AgMIP logo on it for you. All right, how about crop experts? I think this might be a popular group here, all right? So this is the AgMIP green colored hat coming for you. How about livestock and pastures? All right, important. Trying to fit the theme, we have tan colored hats for our livestock experts. All right, economics. You guys might be able to, the colors are shown. I was gonna do a guessing game. Yeah, these are golden hats for our economists. The data and IT experts, people who make all the information work. All right, so your hats are going to be like the little red blinking lights that make everything work. And then we have soils experts. A few I see back here. All right. So we have nice, rich soil colored hats for you. And then water resources. I see a few here, a couple over here. Great. So we got the water resources royal blue hats. This is a new one this year, nutrition and diets. Let's see. All right, we have a couple. Good. So we tried to get something like a nice, nutritious sweet potato color for you. And then the coordination hat is our white hat. These are all the people who make these meetings happen and the steering committee, things like that. So we have a white hat for you. And then another new group at this meeting is the machine learning and remote sensing and kind of integration of big data here. So do we have those folks? All right, very exciting. We have a gray hat for that group as well. So we're really excited that the conversations that we hope to facilitate and foster here at AgMIP9, I'd encourage you to talk to people wearing the same colored hats, seek out people who are wearing different hats, different levels of expertise. Many of you are probably eyeing more than one of these hats. We're gonna try to find one for each of you. But we're really excited to have you all here and encourage that kind of transdisciplinary conversation that AgMIP is really proud of. So yeah, the hats, we're gonna hand out the hats right before the photo is taken tomorrow so that we can have a nice colorful photo with a rainbow of hats there. All right, so at this workshop, you will notice that the agenda is organized around different types of sessions and presentations. We've already had side meetings yesterday, and there will be more side meetings on Friday. These were typically meetings of AgMIP teams that are already established and were reviewing papers and data sets that they've already been working on, and some other teams that were kicking off some activities. During the main session, you're going to have plenary, or during the main workshop today, tomorrow, and Thursday, there will be the plenary sessions that Cynthia has already introduced. We will also have paper presentation sessions, which were drawn from more than 200 submitted abstracts. You'll therefore see about 100 presentations across 21 different sessions, some mix of in-person and online. And those will typically be in sessions with 7 breakout rooms, which are all located in this faculty house. We will have signs and other things to help you find there. So really excited about showing off some of the ongoing work and giving the microphone, especially to some of the early career scientists and students so that we can learn about the new ideas you're bringing to the table. There are also going to be some posters that will be available downstairs that is within walking distance of the coffee break. So we would highly encourage you to take your coffee and a snack during coffee breaks and lunch breaks and go see the posters. And there are also some virtual posters that are available online. We are also going to have two types of working sessions. We have the standard working sessions in the bottom here, which are organized generally around AgMIP teams. And then we have a new radical collaboration session, which is designed to break down some of the traditional barriers, introduce cross-team discussions, and identify new team opportunities. And then finally, we want to take advantage of every moment we have together, since it's been a long time, I think, with the COVID and everything. People really are in need of more in-person interaction. So please take the opportunity to meet people you don't know. And one way we're going to try to foster that is through lunches that are going to be organized around themes. So today we are going to have early career researcher lunches, where we're encouraging people to mentor early career people. So look for people who are in the early career stages and try to have interactions with those folks. Tomorrow we're going to have regional lunches, although I think we might have the days mixed on this. We'll have to clarify on which day is which. But the regional lunches, we're going to encourage you to meet other people from your region to try to form these multi-expert teams that are really needed to take on food system challenges. And then on the third day, we're going to have lunches that are oriented around building a stronger gender balance in agricultural modeling and research and applications. So I think we will verify which day is which on these lunches and make that announcement shortly. And I think with that, I'm going to pass back to Cynthia.
Thanks, Alex. I want my hat. Okay, so all right. Well, now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker for all of AgMIP9, our good colleague and friend, Jessica Fanso. And she's just coming back to Columbia. So we're very, very happy that you're back in Columbia. Yay! She is a professor of climate and the director of the Food for Humanity Initiative at Columbia University's Climate School, right here in New York City. She has a very illustrative career. Prior to Columbia, she's held positions at Johns Hopkins, the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, UN World Food Program, Bioversity International, Earth Institute back in the day, Millennium Development Goals Center at the World Agroforestry Center, that's in Kenya, and the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. So we're so pleased that Jess is going to give the keynote for all of AgMIP9, and we want to present her with the first hat, which
Do I have to wear this?
for the photo.
With my outfit.
For the photo.
All right.
You don't have to wear it.
All right, I'll wear
All right,
it.
wait. Can somebody just take a photo now, and then we'll take a photo of us. Yes, here we go. But they represent carrots, veggies. You know, we have to do, by the modelers, we have to do a much better job on the vegetables, right? And it's wonderful and
Yeah,
welcome.
thank you so much,
Great,
Cynthia.
sure, absolutely.
Do you want this?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to see the room so filled and see each other in person. I'm going to talk today about what I think is, let me set my timer so Cynthia doesn't completely cut me off, a critical time for food systems science and modeling. But, you know, I often do talks that are a little bit dark and depressing, but today I'm going to try to do a talk that's more uplifting. So first of all, welcome to New York City, also known as Gotham, the Big Apple, the Empire City, the city that never sleeps. While it's a city known for its resilience, and New Yorkers are very proud of that, because of its ability to recover from a series of monumental events, several citywide blackouts. Cynthia probably lived through all of them. Bankruptcy in the 1970s, 9/11, and Hurricane Sandy. It's a city like many others that needs nurturing attention and the best science to ensure it remains resilient. Also, so get out there, go explore the boroughs. It's incredible. Go to Brooklyn, go see the waterfront. It's amazing. But welcome also to Columbia University, that purposefully sits in New York City, where the world comes together in one chaotic melting pot. We're thrilled to have a new school, the Climate School, the first in the country, where the mission is to develop and inspire knowledge-based solutions and educate future leaders for just and prosperous societies on a healthy planet. We'll also be starting something called the Food for Humanity Initiative. The first grant we received was from Cynthia's World Food Prize, which was wonderful. What this initiative will look like is yet to be seen. I hope to speak to a lot of you over the next few days to try to figure out what we're going to do with this initiative. But it will build the next generation of climate leaders who focus on food systems. It'll bring together core groups doing cutting edge research and long-standing research at Columbia. We have Lamont, we have the International Research Institute for Climate and Society, we have AgMIP, we have a whole bunch of people who work on food and climate here. Not only in what was formerly the Earth Institute, but now the Climate School, but also in other schools. We have the Mailman School of Public Health, we have the Public Policy School, SEPA, School of Journalism. Many of those schools are working on food and climate issues. So it's bringing all of the expertise together and of course, sharing and translating that evidence locally at the city level for New York, but globally as well. We have this amazing AgMIP community that's been built over the last 13 years. You're all here, hopefully here or online, involving 1,000 plus, Alex, 1,000 plus ag modelers and stakeholders from around the world. If you just look at this flower diagram, amazing number of initiatives happening, generation of knowledge and tools. And you are all working in quite a vast, collaborative, diverse network, which is quite difficult to do. So why are we here? I decided to do a bit of a different talk today. Normally I'd present a lot of data on diets and nutrition and the impacts of climate on food systems, but I wanted to talk about us at this global workshop, the research community, and how we can do more and better, not only in generating science, knowledge, and tools, much like AgMIP does, but how do we make those tools meaningful that impact the world? So why are we here? We're trying to fix this. We're trying to fix it, we're trying to transform it, we're trying to shape it, influence, affect this very wicked system known as the global food system. Many of us have worked on frameworks to try to simplify this so we don't go crazy, putting things in boxes with arrows, but this is a massive system and it needs a lot of fixing. There's not to say that there's been incredible progress and efficiency of our global food system, but we are at a crux, or as some would call it, a polycrisis, in which our food systems are vulnerable, they're inequitable due to many past governance decisions, extreme weather events, a war between two breadbasket countries that slightly dismantled the food system, and the long tail of COVID. And I'm going to throw these, I said I wasn't going to show any data, but you've seen all these statistics, and I don't need to share this with this room. You know this better than I do, of the impacts of climate on food systems and how food systems are impacting the ecologies, the environment, and climate. We know that food systems are generating 30% of total greenhouse gases. There's 6 major economies that are emitting about half of those greenhouse gases, creating a lot of inequity of who should take responsibility. Well, we have social issues. The farmers getting older around the world. Who's going to farm in a very urban world? Agriculture has the highest prevalence of forced and child labor, including the United States being one of the lead. And we still have a massive burden of global malnutrition, and it's getting worse and it's universal. 22% of the world's children under the age of 5 are stunted or chronically undernourished. 850 million people go to bed hungry. 2.2 billion people are overweight and obese, leading to diet-related non-communicable diseases. These statistics are staggering and difficult. And, you know, while we think about food systems, we as researchers need to think about how food systems sit in an intimate dance with other systems. This is from the World Economic Forum Global Risks Perception Survey. There are significant risks happening across every system that we interact with it, be it the health, the economic, the education system. And this map shows you, it's a perception survey of what are the most worrying risks of those that took this survey. And the bubble, size of the bubble is the influence of that risk, and the lines show their relevance to each other. The blue is economic, green is environment, orange is geopolitical, and red social. Things like collapse of systemically important supply chains, the cost of living crisis, state collapse, mis and disinformation. We're dealing with a world that is quite at a crux. And when we look at the survey in which they people ranked the severity of risk and the potential impacts, what you can see is the green is the environmental risks. In both the short and the long term on the right, natural disasters, extreme weather events, climate mitigation, climate adaptation. These were the most concerning risks of this group. So we are really at a crucial moment. And it's important to think about risks to who and who's going to be disproportionately impacted. I'm just going to show you one inequity slide. This is showing you the percentage of the population who cannot afford what is considered a healthy diet, one that meets nutrient needs and one that's health protective. The darker brown shows you over 75% of that population living in that country cannot afford a healthy diet. 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. That's incredible. This is now data being tracked by FAO every year and really tells an important story about inequity at that very individual and household level. So when you hear all these stats, when you read the news, you're going to many global talks, including this one, it seems like the world is on its knees. This poem, or part of this poem by Warsan Shire, I really recommend reading her if anyone likes poetry. This really resonated with me. Later that night, I held an atlas in my lap. I ran my fingers across the whole world and whispered, "Where does it hurt?" It's answered, everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. But with these stark realities and unprecedented ecological destruction and inequities, there's been moments of incredible change, resistance, and achievement in very positive ways. And we must remember that. We have to remember what's not working, but we also have to remember what's working if we want to make sustainable change. So there's a need to transform food systems. There's been calls to do so, but there's a need to transform them on a grand scale. Tinkering on the edges is not enough. As Mario said, we're running out of time. And the inequities and inequalities factor significantly into what actions are taken moving forward, with nuanced questions arising, such as who must take on more responsibility? What responsibilities must they enact in the near term? And how does the world hold those who are responsible to account? Researchers are very important. We have a big responsibility. So how can the global food system research endeavor go beyond tinkering? How do we transform? Global research endeavors like AgMIP, they take a collective, collaborative network approach to science, and that's really important. And it's critical to keep generating data and model-driven evidence for policymakers. But I want to share 6 thoughts as how we as researchers could consider to ensure the work that we do is more impactful for the policymaker. So one is Remember our shared history. We often feel like we're starting from scratch. There's threads of ideas and stories that weave around the world through decades and centuries. The question is, what stories should and do we tell? Who is telling them? And who is hearing them? Scientists and researchers, at the end of the day, we're storytellers. We need to get better at telling stories, but we're storytellers. And with that, storytelling comes with a lot of responsibility. But we have history behind us. I'm just showing a figure. I'm working on a book of the counterculture movement of the 1960s and 70s in the US. They tried to transform the food system. They tried. Maybe they didn't do everything right, but they made an effort to do it. Some of it lasted and had an impact, and some of it didn't. But this was tried 50 years ago to create a revolution across food systems. What can we learn from that? What can we learn about climate scientists trying to convince the US government to curb carbon emissions in the 70s, but the US didn't act? What went wrong? What happened with US policymakers where they didn't listen to the scientists, even though we had enough information to demonstrate that the world was warming and accelerating? What have we learned from COVID? Hopefully it's in our rearview mirror, it's in our history now, but what have we learned? Something I wrote in this COVID-19 and world order, sounds very serious, very war studies-esque, but we know that if food systems are to function effectively, equitably, and sufficiently during the pandemic and long after, the political environment must be one that embraces global cooperation, inclusion, and minimize political polarization and geopolitical competition. We as scientists cannot remain silent. We have to engage in the political process, as dismal as it may be. The second idea is that we need to keep generating the science and the evidence base. While there are many different types of evidence, there's many ways to go about that. And I like this quote by Murakami, as many of you know, as a writer. Maybe working on the little things as dutifully and honestly as we can is how we stay sane when the world is falling apart. Part of working dutifully and honestly is to engage with the communities who could benefit from our research. So AgMIP is moving beyond just the models, hopefully, and working a lot with stakeholders and farmers to use those tools to help them adapt. And I like this framework that is on the AgMIP website. So we have to be thinking about, not only is it important to generate knowledge, but how do we use it? And how is it used by those who need that knowledge the most? We need to start moving beyond just our peer review papers and really sharing information that we're generating. Two projects that we're working on is a little self-promotion plug. We're trying to help policymakers navigate how their food systems are performing. Policymakers are often flying blind on how to make decisions across their food system. It's complex. We have something called the Food Systems Dashboard, which is bringing together a set of very publicly available data, a lot of it from FAO, in visually appealing ways to help governments diagnose their food systems and take action. We also have something called the Food Systems Countdown Initiative that involves about 65 scientists. Mario and I are co-chairs, along with Lawrence Haddad, former World Food Prize winner, Cynthia's friend at GAIN, and Jose Rosario Moncayo, who's the lead stats at FAO. And what we've done is we've brought these 65 people together. We've created a monitoring framework so the world could start tracking food systems across a range of domains that food systems touch on. So keep your eye out for that publication, hopefully coming out later this year. But we as scientists also need to come to consensus. Without that, we leave users of data and evidence confused about conflicting information. We need to agree on our vision of food systems transformation and how we need to transform, or at least acknowledge where there's disagreement and understand that sometimes your view is limited. This is a paper by Christopher Bene at the Alliance for Bioversity in CIAT, where he really talks about these different narratives and how I'm from nutrition. I see the food system very differently than how a crop modeler will, and what the goals should be for the food system. We need to figure out how to come together. There's too much division and there's too much argument that doesn't allow us to move forward. The third area is scaling our evidence and tools. The IPCC has been, many of you have been involved in the IPCC. It's been incredible at putting out evidence. I mean, if you read the 1,000 pages every time, I just look at the figures, and I know Alex is proud of the figure this year. There's a lot of information, and it's been important, and it's become a very influential set of documents and has likely influenced the policy field. But not enough. I mean, there's not enough being done on food systems. And I've put this figure from Cynthia that she published in Nature Food, which is showing you a whole range of food system actions and their potential to mitigate or adapt. And the darker blue is high confidence or high potential. So we have tons of solutions, as you can see from this table. And I know you can't see even what's written there. There's so many solutions. The question is why haven't they been invested in? Why haven't they been scaled? What are we doing in the food system sector that the energy sector's done right, and maybe we haven't done enough of? How do we incentivize investment in this space? We need to use momentum. We have a moment, we have a space. There's been a lot of focus on food. We had the UN Food System Summit. We have the Sustainable Development Goals. We have the Convention of Biological Diversity. We have COP. We have decades of action. We need to seize these moments and keep food very high on the development agenda. I have about 5 more minutes, Cynthia, is that okay? Okay. But to do that, we as researchers don't really want to engage a lot in policy, but we have to. We have to be thinking about policy, politics, and the politicking that happens. And policymakers often work in bounded rationality. They gather limited information before they make decisions, and they have to make them quickly. Sometimes they have to make a choice, and we as researchers like, wait, we need more data, we need more research. They don't have time for that. So they're basing their decisions on a whole series of attributes: values, experience, pragmatism. Some of it's opinion-based policy, more so right now in the United States, and less about evidence-based policy. And that's not to say that policymakers don't take evidence into account, they do, but they're on a very different time scale than we as scientists. And I like this quote from Julius Court: "The good news is that evidence can matter. The bad news is that it often does not." But we as researchers need to understand the policy cycle and the policy process as best we can to help policymakers in making evidence-based decisions. But we also have to keep in mind that there is no, quote, policy cycle to inject evidence at a point of decision. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and it's complex. And we need to deal with that complexity as we do with our science, that policy too is complex. And we need to grapple with the elephants. The big elephant in the room is the power imbalance in the global food system. It's now so concentrated in the hands of a couple of corporations that largely determine how and which food moves from producers to consumers. So you can think of an hourglass. We have many farmers, we have 8 billion eaters, but there's a concentration of traders, distributors, processors, packagers, and retailers. So how do we govern a system that is imbalanced? This played out in the UN Food System Summit and fractured into 2 different summits because of this elephant. And we as researchers need to grapple with this. So let me end with my last couple slides, a reason for hope. So we're at a time when facts and evidence are under ever greater scrutiny and even openly disregarded and suspect by some policymakers, business leaders. But the rigors of science and evidence must be maintained. Research can and does bring wholesale changes in attitudes, political thought, and action. But as researchers, we often keep our head down and dig deep into the details with laser sharp focus to generate data and evidence for the greater good of science and knowledge. But we can no longer sit quietly behind our benches and our laptops and blissfully hope that someone, anyone, will read our Nature paper that came out last week. We need to be attuned to the political environment. And I would argue for a few things, and then I'll end. We need to prioritize, cooperate, and collaborate on systems thinking and doing. Super difficult to do. Most of us are not trained to do this. It's difficult. We all speak very different languages. We need to generate, share, and use evidence that informs real world happenings, real world decisions, and real world users. I work on things that only I care about that never see the light of day because they're not concerning problems in the real world. I need to stop doing that, but for self-gratification purposes. We need to be thinking about it. We're gonna work in the food system, incentive structures. How is political commitments and will made? How is power dynamics playing out? How do policymakers take action? We need to always be thinking about that as we do our work. Of course, we need to continue to build capacity. We're sitting at Columbia, agency and voice, and purposefully prioritize equity and people in everything we do, as Cynthia laid out the objectives of a just approach to our work. We're gonna have to figure out how to mitigate conflicts of interest, trust issues, and biases, ideologies in science. It's starting to be problematic, particularly in the nutrition field. No one trusts nutrition sciences anymore because of the vested interests. It is incredibly problematic for us to move forward. And we need to practice global citizenry and evidence activism. Get out in the world. Don't go to just the meetings where you know everyone. Go to a meeting where you know no one. Get out there. I mean, this is a very comfortable environment. You've all been working together, you know each other. Get out into other places. So I want to end, I have hope. Research has a vital role in charting a positive and sustainable direction for global food systems, to promote fair and equitable and decent livelihoods, to be nature positive, and to promote better food security, nutrition, and health. And I like this quote by Rebecca Solnit: incremental change can happen quietly, and change is rarely straightforward. Victories slip by unheralded, while failures are more readily detected. And while things don't change for the better all the time, they change, and we can play a role in that change if we act. So hope is not so much a belief that everything was, is, and will be fine, because it certainly won't if we stay on a business as usual. But it's about the possibilities and the basis for action, and it's about navigating towards the future. And I'm gonna end with a Harlem resident, James Baldwin, who many of you know. He was born in Harlem. We are in Harlem, by the way. And I'll end with this quote for our conversation. For nothing is fixed, forever, forever, forever. It is not fixed. The earth is always shifting. The light is always changing. The sea does not cease to grind down rock. Generations do not cease to be born, and we are responsible to them because we are the only witnesses they have. We as scientists are the witnesses, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Don't go away. Thank you, Jess, for such a wonderful, wonderful keynote for our AgMIP9 Global Workshop. Are there any questions online?
So nothing online. People online, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A on Zoom, but nothing right now.
Any questions, comments, reactions from folks here in the room? Walter, why don't you just say something?
I didn't present data because you're all going to be talking about data for the night. I wanted to do something a little bit more.
Great. We do have, okay, we have a couple. Yes, please. Good. Just, yes, we want the whole of AgMIP9 to be interactive.
I am Eric Just from France. Thank you, Jessica, for this very nice talk. I was thinking something. Coming from Europe, we have two main goals at the moment. I must say the Green Deal and the famous farm to fork paradigm. I was thinking that we are wrong. We need to inverse probably the paradigm from the fork to farm. I mean, what is needed in the plate? What are the products we need to hit in a One Health perspective? So, do you think we need to, as a scientist, work a lot to convince that we need to invest this paradigm to go from the fork to farm?
Well, you're asking the wrong person because I'm absolutely going to say yes. The way we in nutrition and public health, and my postdoc Bianca's here, we talk about this a lot, that the whole agriculture design and paradigm has always been one of looking at, how can we increase the quantity of food? And when we look at that, of what are the nutrient needs of the diet and the cultural needs of what people want, there's a real mismatch. And we always look fork, well, we call, really in nutrition, we call it toilet to farm. There's a whole process of the human body that counts in the food system. But the whole process of fork to farm, that's how we view the world. It's just really not how agriculture has viewed it, and the way subsidy policies have been set up and the way trade policies have been set up. So our view is always, how do we improve the plate and work backwards? So how do we improve those supply chains to inject nutrition across the supply chain? And then it eventually leads to what's being grown. So absolutely, but it requires a major shift. And there's a lot of conversation about subsidy policies and do we need to pair it more to what would be considered a healthy and sustainable diet? We're far from getting there though, Matt.
All right, one question from Walter or comment?
Just
and then we'll
just a very short comment, inspired by your talk. So clearly, we are living in a new world where we're getting more and more pressured and interested in informing policy and decisions. And I think one of the big challenges is that the way that we advance as scientists is we advance by becoming better and better in smaller and smaller issues. So a long time ago, we wrote a paper saying we create islands of knowledge in a sea of ignorance. And if we want to inform policy, we need to navigate that sea, connect those islands. Having Jess in the climate school, it's a great signal that the university is giving. One of the top researchers in nutrition is coming to work in the climate school. This is wonderful, and this is a new model. This is one of the things that is so good of AgMIP also. We have a lot of expertise here. I still think that, and I want to challenge ourselves to break even more these little groups, these little silos where we feel very comfortable and start interacting with people that we cannot even understand what they're saying. But we need that. If we really want to inform policies and decisions, we need to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jess. Look forward to the whole
Looking forward to the whole
this
conference.
week, and also your wonderful contributions to the climate school. Fantastic. All right, let's see. So we are now, take a deep breath. We're going into the first plenary, which is on improving models and integrated assessments. I'm going to give a very short keynote. It's really an introduction to this session. I want to keep it short because we want to get to the panel. Garrett is here as the moderator, Garrett Hugenboom from University of Florida. He's going to introduce the panel members. So let's just get going. So here we are, ag and food models in the age of climate action. First, lessons from COVID, history, lessons from history. What have we learned from the COVID experience? And, oops, how's this, better? Good. I'm putting forward 4 things. First, the importance of modeling. Every single day in the New York Times and on the TV, there were projections of the COVID case rates around the world. Those were all done by modeling. So this is a huge example of we're in long-term crisis, short-term and long-term crisis around food system. And we have this example from the use of models for decision-making around COVID. That's the first. The second is that food shocks and disruptions can happen from any quarter at any time. The food system disruptions from COVID, there were many of different kinds. Just to give a couple of examples, there were farm labor issues, for example, in the meat packing factories in the Midwest. There were farm labor disruptions in fields when crops could not be harvested. There were economic impacts of the farmers not being able to get their economic livelihoods. Many different aspects of COVID affected the food system. And this shows that food shocks basically are waiting to happen. And of course, we have the, not COVID, but our current conflict in the war in Ukraine. So we have to be much more ready to model food shocks. I think this is a challenge to us all. We've done some, and Ron Sands is here from USDA, and an AgMIP team has been working on that, but I think we need to do more. A third part from the COVID, a lesson from the COVID, is the focus on equity, because it was so clear that the impacts of COVID were they were distributed so inequitably, and that the poorest, lowest income, lowest socioeconomic groups were most affected in regard to mortality rates of COVID. So again, you see, all these things are just now coming to us as just as saying, this is all happening now. We need to respond now. Finally, coming out of COVID, we are now in a hybrid world. And AgMIP9 is an example of this. We want to make sure that everyone online is participating just as much as everyone in the room. So this is, we're learning how to be in our hybrid world right now. So we're really, and AgMIP, very dedicated to create the hybrid world in the most, to answer the challenges that Jess put forward to us. So brief introduction to AgMIP. Some of you are here for the first time. We're going to show the photos of the global workshops in a moment. But just to really to just review, what is the mission? Alex and I are from NASA, and so mission statements. Missions are incredibly important to NASA. So having our mission statement always front and center, about really creating and improving the decision-making models and assessments of climate change to achieve local to global food security. Let's always keep that very broad mission in mind of AgMIP. Here's the photos. So raise your hand if you were at the first global workshop in 2010. Yeah, look. It's so fantastic. Many of you then came along the way, and how many people is it your first AgMIP Global Workshop? Great, welcome. And welcome to all along the way. I believe that Jim Jones is on the line. I think we just want to acknowledge Jim as one of the founding co-founders of AgMIP. And Jim would always say, what is AgMIP? AgMIP is a worldwide scientific community. And these photos, we think, prove it. So we have the global workshops, we have regional workshops. That's where we're going to have lunches. The regions are today. Yeah, region lunches today. the individual teams, the wheat team. This was the photo of wheat meeting number 2. And Sentold, what number are you up to? 17. So this long-term, I believe also, we can't just be getting together for projects anymore. It's like, it's this long-term work to actually keep improving, keep interacting with the policymakers so it's not just these one-offs, kind of turn the channel research projects. Then just to say, you can see that all during COVID, we met virtually, and this was the 8th global workshop in October of 2020. There were, this was a silver lining of COVID, that there were people who attended that virtual workshop, completely virtual, from more than 90 countries. So this is a really good thing that came from COVID, and our embrace of Zoom and Teams, that the reach was so much broader. Okay, I'm now going to show you something that came from the very first workshop in 2010 in Long Beach. Alex and I, we would listen to the discussion, very lively discussion, the plenaries, breakouts, and the coffee breaks. And every night, Alex and I would stay up until midnight. And then every morning we would show the evolution of this figure. And this is really the AgMIP scientific approach. And it has stood the test of time. We are still, first of all, putting agricultural models front and center. And it's all the range of models: physical, the climate part, the biophysical part, crops and livestock, the socioeconomics from the beginning. We didn't add in, I'm looking at Herman, we didn't add in the economics after, or try to, because you can't. You have to have all the social and the economic part together. And by the way, see where it's, the models are stacked up, because that's another very key part of AgMIP. It's multi-model, not just one. If you start using one model, you start to believe it, if it's only one model. Right? Right. And now we are so much more rigorous in being able to show the range of what the model results are, to understand those uncertainties and delve in. So here we go. There are 2 tracks. The first one is on model improvement. We take historical climate and historical policy and socioeconomics. We use the multi-model approach, and then we do model calibration and improvement. And Daniel Wallach, where are you? Raise your hand. He is the AgMIP king of calibration. So thank you so much. Absolutely critical. And then, of course, we use these for evaluation and intercomparison to actually, before we go into any kind of a future, right, we have to really prove. And by the way, this is to interact with the policymakers. This is a very key step. You have to prove that the models work in what we've experienced so far. We can't just have these, oh yeah, with this scenario, this is what's going to happen in the future. Absolutely, the very first step is this track 1, which we spend, and thanks to all the AgMIP teams, Ken and I were talking about it earlier, Ken Booty, this is also very much the heart of AgMIP. But then we have to use the models. We can't just improve them endlessly, right? Because then it's using them for future climate, future policy. This is the whole scenarios. Alex is part of the whole creation of the new IPCC scenarios, which are going to be used in the 7th assessment report to utilize and assess the future, but with these models that we collectively have improved and understand. We use them to look at to test adaptation, mitigation, and extensions, water resources, sustainability, many, many different aspects. And then can look at future agricultural production, trade, and food security. And we have to add in nutrition there, because finally we are bringing nutrition in. So here's the famous petal diagram. I won't go through all of this, but the way that AgMIP works is that groups form. This is network science. It's a new form of science, really. It's not just one team here, one group here, one scientist in front of their computers, although that's part of it. But this is really the panoply, the petal diagram of all the different aspects that are actually we need models for to be able to provide advice to and work with policymakers in an interactive, co-generated way to then provide the evidence base for policy change. Just cross-cutting, there's cross-cutting themes, uncertainty, aggregation and scaling. That was something Jess had just challenged us. Key interactions with water resources, the livestock and pastures, soils, crop rotations, data and tools, regional integrated assessments, global economic assessments, the experiment model interface, very, very critical. Bruce Kimball is here. It's so great to have the linkage to, and of course we're channeling Jerry Hadfield, who is a great experimentalist who is one of the co-founders of AgMIP as well. Because we got, it's like the data on the ground have to go into the models. So, so important. We want to thank the AgMIP Leaders Forum for each element in this petal diagram. There are AgMIP leaders who run those groups and get them together and make them happen. So we thank, and they come together in the AgMIP Leaders Forum. There's by the way, lots of leadership opportunities. None of these things are fixed in stone. So I'm going to end with 3 examples of the final objective of AgMIP9 was to strengthen science stakeholder policy linkages for future systems. Going to give 3 quick examples. The first one is the IPCC. So what does the IPCC do, really? It engages international policymakers on both mitigation and adaptation actions. The IPCC is the science body that provides the evidence for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And we're so proud this year to have AgMIP work in the synthesis report. SYR stands for synthesis report, and the work of the Global Gridded Crop Model Initiative of AgMIP, led by Jonas Jägermeier and Christoph Müller. And this shows maize yields in direct to the policymakers. This is approved by diplomats from all the countries in the world. And this is showing for 3 different levels of mitigation what would happen to maize yields. It's a little hard to see, but there are some hashed lines there, because what we're able to do through AgMIP is indicate where the models agree and where the models don't agree. We're completely honest and transparent about it. So big, true achievement from AgMIP to be all the way into the IPCC. The second one is Bruno's work in the Midwest, pulling together. This is bringing multi-model, in this case 5 models, that approach to greenhouse gas and carbon sequestration decision support, supporting agricultural policies in this country, but we hope also internationally, for carbon credits. This is using the 5 model approach to see how no-till and low-till over time, based on, and the stars are where there are farmer interactions and observations, to show the effects of the mitigation. This work directly can provide evidence for national policy programs like carbon sequestration, or in a broader term, payment for ecosystem services for farmers, because livelihoods of farmers are so important, to sequester carbon, linking to the largest global challenges right in the farmers' fields. So that's the second example of the science stakeholder policy linkages. And the third one is a project that is getting going this year. It's organized by led out of the US State Department. It's called Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils. It's called VAX, and it's focused on traditional crops in Africa, now known as opportunity crops, the crops sometimes that we would call orphan crops or neglected crops. And this project is connecting climate scientists, breeders, and nutrition scientists for food security and resilience in Africa, This is adaptation indices, indicators, and Kevin, where are you? Where's Kevin Carl? He's the online manager of this project, so get with him. Creating these kinds of indicators and having the models inform those indicators can help help provide the evidence base for a very large diplomatic effort, an effort to improve the funding around the breeding and nutrition and climate resilience of those crops. So with that, new teams. So we saw the petal diagram. Some of these are already made it, but here are new teams. We're calling out a few. There are others. AgMIP machine learning. It's great you are here. AgMIP ozone, absolutely critical. Yeah, raise hands. Crop residues. I think Mark, right? Corbeils? Who is it? Soterios, where are you? Where's Soterios? Yes, okay, in the back. Soterios, so Jose Guarin and others on the ozone. We have machine learning. Then Matthew Hayek led a very exciting side meeting yesterday on alternative proteins. How are we going to model those, Matthew? You have to lead us. But the important, so thanks to all of those folks who are bringing the new teams together, but of course others. And someone's been saying policy, we need policy teams. So we have the Food Climate Partnership, which is an alliance with policy. They're linked they're based originally at the School for International and Public Affairs here at Columbia, but we need to, I think, bring that alliance together with the policymakers more explicitly. So with that, I say, have Alex and I say, have a great AgMIP9, and we look forward to interacting with you and radically collaborating with all of you in the next 4 days. Thank you. Okay. Now, Garrett Hubenboom, first panel. Great.
So I'll be leading a panel on improvement. As you all know, AgMIP is about intercomparison and improvement, and personally as a model developer, I felt that the improvement always has been lacking. But after listening to Jesse, I think maybe I should go out of the DSAT modeling world and go into politics. Anyhow, but we have a very exciting panel of young scientists. I would like to invite them to come up front while I introduce you. So the first one is Madina Dacumba. She's a postdoctoral research associate at Leibniz Center for Agriculture Landscape Development. She's a geographer by training with expertise in crop and systems modeling, drought stress scenarios, analysis, emphasis on genotype, environment management interactions, and climate change impact assessments. And she's done extensive work, especially in West Africa. Second panel member is Christoph Müller, works at Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Potsdam, Germany. He's a ecologist by training, has been working in carbon cycle modeling, integrated assessment modeling, land use modeling, crop modeling by dynamic global vegetation, crop and hydrologic model, LPJML model, sorry. And he has been the co-lead, which I just mentioned briefly earlier, with the global gridded modeling work. The next panel member is Dr. Mingpen Chen. She's professor in the School of Agriculture, Economics and Rural Development at Renmin University in China. She holds a BA in Environmental Economics from Renmin University of China and obtained a PhD from Tsinghua University in Environmental Systems Analysis. Her research focuses on adaptation and mitigation strategies in agriculture and sustainability of agriculture. And then last but not least, very difficult to see, we have one panel member online from FAO, Marco Sanchez. He's the Deputy Director of the Agri-Food Economics at FAO, where he directs the flagship report, which we also mentioned a minute ago, the state of food security and nutrition in the world, and the state of food and agriculture. He also leads policy optimization modeling in the framework of monitoring and analyzing food and agriculture policies program called MAFA. He has served as an ex-officio member of the AgMIP Steering Committee from 2018 through 2020. So each of the panel members will provide a brief introduction for slides up front. Then after that, there will be room for questions with panel members, for people online through chat, as well as for people in the room. And we have about, I think, 40 minutes for this session. Correct, Alex? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, it's okay. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Gerrit. I would like to start by saying that crop models, yeah. So crop models, in order to allow a great integrated assessment and then provide robust evidence to support policymakers, and more resilient farming systems should be adapted to the local and regional conditions. I want to use this opportunity to thank the organizing committee of AgMIP. It's an honor for me to be here today among these distinguished professors. It shows how important is the topic, and it also shows that the growing commitment of AgMIP in giving space to the next generation of scientists. Thanks a lot. It shows that we have our say and that our say is going to be taken into account. So my talk will be focused on West Africa, where I am from, and where the cropping systems are characterized by their complexity and the heterogeneity in the agricultural landscape structure, such as the intercropping, the agroforestry system, the degraded soils, the diverse soil conditions, and the high wind pressure. So the extreme events are also projected to be severe in this region. By extreme event, I mean flood and then drought. And we also see the highly variable seasonal and interannual rainfall patterns that are leading to a situation in which farmers' investment to increase crop productivity are risky. So all of these are having an impact on soil, water, and nutrient balances, as well as on crop productivity. And most of these interactions and factors are not truly captured by the release crop models. On top of that, soils in Africa are characterized by their deficiency in nutrients. Particularly, phosphorus has been reported to be one of the major constraints. Phosphorus stress has been reported to be one of the major constraints to cereals production in West Africa. And we know that in most of the release cropping system models, P stress, phosphorus stress, effect on crop growth and crop productivity are not really well captured. I know that some work have been done in DSAT by Gerrit and AgMIP, but then there are many other models that are unable to capture this. And then the root growth and nutrient uptake also has to have been overlooked and need some consideration. And on top of that, we know that there has been a limited testing of the management practices, the soils, and the weather that predominate in the region. I know that our systems are very complex and we can't take into account all those complexity in our model. But the point is that we've been kind of using this simplified assumption in order to represent the complex and really heterogeneous system. And it does not, this simplified assumption does not truly replicate the complexity in our system. So what I would like to suggest is that we truly focus on calibration, which is an important step in it's an important step in integrated assessment. So by calibration, I mean that we should take into account the local crops with the local crop characteristic, the local weather, the local management practices, as well as the local soil types. I know that this is very challenging in West Africa due to the limited data availability and accessibility. People working in the region know what I'm referring to. And I want to give an example of calibration to show the importance of this step in modeling. Some times ago, we did some calibration of photoperiod sensitive sorghum varieties in APSIM. And then actually, this is how APSIM kind of predicts the canopy growth using the total plant leaf area approach, in which the canopy growth follow this bell-shaped curve. And we realized that the canopy growth of those highly photoperiod sensitive varieties was not really following this bell-shaped curve. So we wanted the model to reproduce the canopy growth like the dashed black line, but that was not the case. So we had to make a replacement of our total plant leaf area approach that exists in the existing APSIM model, replace that by the individual leaf area approach. So what I mean to say is that we may see that the difference between these two curves is not much, but it has to be considered. Maybe in a global modeling, these are details that may not be important. But then if we focus on the local and regional context, those details means a lot. Why? Because in Mali, for example, and in many West African countries, the mixed crop livestock system is very important. So if you miss to really adequately predict your biomass and canopy growth, that will affect your yield, and it will also affect the overall productivity prediction of the system. So, well, that was just an example, and it shows how important it is to consider the really local characteristic of our input data sets. So I want to suggest some action points. Improving the model in an integrated assessment context is very important, but it has to go with the capacity building in modeling in general, research partnership. I know that AgMIP has done a lot in the region about this, but still there are a lot to be done. And then the co-development approaches have to be used. The local knowledge has to be included in our model improvement as well as in our integrated assessment. It's very important. I was happy yesterday to see that there are 2 projects going on already in the region, in Senegal and Gambia, that are using these co-development approaches, which is really great. I hope there will be more opportunities in West Africa. And then I will end up by the 5 action point, which is the fair data set. We have to accept that there is really data challenge in West Africa, in my part of the world. Like we always say that there is data set, but in order for us to evaluate our improved model, we need good quality data set in order to allow the model to make robust evidence to support policy decisions. So on that, I want to thank you for your attention. And I also want to say that, use this opportunity to say that we set a community of practices of modelers that work on West Africa, in West African context. So we meet every 2 months to listen to an expert talk. So if you are interested in assisting to that meeting, you can contact me. This is my email. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So as you've heard, I'm working at the global scale, and the global scale is the greatest place and the worst place to be at. So you get a lot of attention, right? We get into the synthesis report. We have like 50 different groups requesting our current data and working with it, so a lot of downstream attention. That's great. At the same time, you also have to ask your modelers, why does your model think you have negative 15 tons per hectare yield potential in this area that hasn't seen agriculture before? So models just go bonkers if you put them to places where conditions are out of the usual range that these models were developed for, and that kind of is difficult. And then we comfort ourselves by comparing aggregated yield data to FAO-Stat at the national level and see, oh, it goes up and down, also goes up and down, great, we did things right. But then, if you put it forward, do this projection, as Cynthia said, you see it's all over the place. We know for pretty sure that yields will be between plus 60% and minus 60%. So, and I don't know about you, but where I live, there's very little crocodiles, and I'm happy about that because I don't like interacting with them, but actually I do recognize one when I see one. And so the point is, we have to kind of tame this crocodile, and I need all of your help for that. If you see me running around, so please scan me and go to a survey that I've put online. And because it's not about calibration, sorry, it's about evaluation. We need to evaluate if our models are fit for purpose, and we need to evaluate models that we're actually using. And we have to stop thinking of models as code. Models as code and parameters. And if we change the parameters, we need to redo the entire evaluation, because we've seen that at the global scale, but also at all these other scales that AgMIP is covering. You can use the exact same model and you calibrate it to the exact same target, and you get very, very different functional relationships in the models. Like one is totally sensitive to CO2 and the other is not. One is totally sensitive to temperature and the other is not. And you need to know that because they will all produce these curves. And then you have this spaghetti all over, and no one can profit from that. So what we need to do, and the problem is, crop yield is the end of the season final thing, and you can get to that through 100 of different processes that are interacting. And on the right, you see like a very shady thing of machine learning supported extraction from what's described in the literature. And only part of that is actually in the models, and then it's parameterized all over. And it's very easy to get the right answer for the wrong reasons. So what we need to do is stop looking at final yield as our benchmark, because it's not telling anything. We need to look at functional relationships. We need to do sanity tests with the models. What would we expect a model to do if we change like input, if it becomes warmer, or if it becomes drier, or if there's more nutrient, or if the two of these change at the same time? On Wednesday, I have a talk where I can basically demonstrate that these models really have fundamentally different functional emergent properties that we are completely unaware of if we are just looking at this first curve comparing the year-to-year variability at some final end of the season yield. So I need your brains, I need your contribution. Don't be shy to say a model should pass the test of no negative yields, but maybe you have also something more elaborate that you can put in there, put in pseudocode, put in text, put in whatever. I'm happy to receive your feedback. There's this link, QR code. Thanks so much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Min Peng Chen from Renmin University, and it is my pleasure to be here to present. And actually, I'm maybe the first one to echo Jessica's advocate. I come to a meeting that I know almost nobody. Okay. And actually, I think Madik and Christopher already show some of their reflections from regional and global perspective on models. I will maybe a little bit think of the modeling work out of the box, because I work very closely with policymakers and all kinds of stakeholders over the past years. And actually, as Jessica has said, that the scientists are storyteller, right? So, but the problem is for policymakers, there are a lot of storytellers and there are a lot of stories for them. So it is still challenging for them to make choices. So for policies, for bridging the policy and science, the battery is running low. So okay, I hope they can. So unlike scientists, I think policymaker will focus on big stories, big questions. For example, I always challenged by stakeholders or policymakers when we are communicating with them that according to the model result, the yield will be reduced by 5% under different scenarios. They will always ask me the same question. So what's the risk for food security? So that is very, very difficult to answer to a question for us to answer. So actually, in my view, that we may need to work specifically on some policy-oriented researches to answer their big questions. I know that will be very difficult, and I think over the past years, with the development of computation capabilities and better data, we gain better understanding of those big questions. But still, we have to answer what the policies, actions of priority. And this is will bring about another question: how we can better represent the policy in the scenarios in our models. So that sometimes is very, very difficult. We will have historical policies, and we will have future policies and ex ante and ex post analysis. That will be very, very challenging, I think, from my perspective. The second question is how we can give them different synergy and trade-off between different important objectives, including food security, the impact for economy and society. So that's why I still think it's very important to collaborate with different disciplines and to ask this rather challenging questions. And another thing is we have a lot of models and how to enhance the different models, because for some questions, one model cannot have the ability to resolve all the questions. So how to enhance the consistent application between different models will be another important. The third point for this slide I will emphasize is some quick and simple tools are very, very important for policymakers. Sometimes we have very complex models. We have to calibrate them with a very large amount of data. But for them, that will be very difficult to apply. And they need like a very simple one, very quick one for them to help them make decisions. In this context, I will talk about a little bit for the data of high quality and comparability. And we have had very good data for maybe from for experimental data, the climate data, we have different kind of scenario data, and from the natural science perspective. But I think for economic data, for social data, they has a long way to go. For example, we are still lack of the cost data and the benefit data of different agricultural interventions. And if we are looking into the IAMs for at the global level, for the cost curve analysis, for example, we will find that they are based on very sparse cost data around across the global. So, but you know, the cost and the benefit are very different across regions. So how can we improve these analyses are based on the good quality of socio-economic data. And the current data will lack of consistency in the methodology, sample strategy, and calibrate. So how we can enhance this job in different countries will be very, very important. The second one is how we can represent the interaction between different actors in modeling research will be also very important. We have conducted a lot of research on the technical potential as well as the economic potential. So what's the social potential? That is also a very important question the policymakers are concerned about. So what's the perception? What's that of actors? What their attitude towards different policy actions. So if we would like to enhance those knowledges, to improve those knowledges, this will be very, very important. And the third part is about adaptation. I know there are a lot of people here working on adaptation, and the economics of climate change teaches us if we can make rational decisions unless we can put adaptation and mitigation in the integrated model simultaneously. But with the development of the mitigation process, we have gained very good knowledge about the mitigation pathways, the cost curve, although the data is about, but we know the cost benefit of different mitigation options. We know the mitigation or the emission trajectory in different sectors, including agriculture, for different region, for different countries. But for adaptations, I think those knowledge remains unknown. I think the challenge for adaptation is multifaceted. For example, we don't have universal metric for adaptation, and adaptation is context specific. So there is no one size fits all solutions or something like that. But how we can make adaptation how we can enhance the representative of adaptation in models are very important, because we need to have the adaptation strategies plans as well. So we need to address the questions that if we are going to develop those strategies and plans. Another thing is we also need the adaptation projections into future. How we can better enhance the linkages between adaptation, temperature goal, and the mitigation pathways in IAM will be a very important question. And with the negotiation under the UNFCCC, I guess there will be emerging issues for us, the adaptation as well. For example, what's the limit of adaptation? And how we can define and measure transformational adaptation, because now we will have incremental adaptation. We are going to have transformational adaptation. So how we can do that? How we can represent that in model? I think that will gave us a lot of work to do. So I will stop here. Again, very happy to be here to share some reflections and common challenges I have faced over the past years. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me well? Good morning, everyone. My name is Marco Sanchez from the FAO. Let me share my screen so that you can see a few slides that I will show today. Let me see. Okay. I think you are now seeing the full screen, if I am correct. So let me first of all say that I'm very pleased to join this very important AgMIP9 workshop, and I am very thankful to the organizers for inviting me and the FAO as such to provide some thoughts here on what we are doing about modeling. Obviously, the question that I posed to myself when I was preparing this talk was about why do we need to improve models and integrated assessments? And I believe the answer lies in several of the things that have already been said by my fellow panelists and also by Jessica and Cynthia. Basically, one main reason is that we can no longer analyze sector challenges, but rather we need to analyze systems challenges, and that creates challenges for modeling. New tools are also particularly needed to address agri-food system challenges and their transformation. And if we take the topic of this AgMIP9, the future of the food as well, through modeling. Now, when we look at systems and we look at transformation and we look at the future, it basically means that we are also considering several objectives at the same time. And that also makes the modeling very, very challenging. We are talking here about economic objectives, social objectives. We spoke about equity already, climate objectives, environmental objectives. So this makes it very challenging for the modeling community to move the frontier. Now, in the particular context of what we do, we focus a lot on low-income countries. And these are countries that have scarce resources to fund policies and investments. So that basically means that we have to do a lot better for these countries when it comes to modeling as well. Particularly, we want to help policymakers in these countries through modeling to optimize their limited resources. So we need the right tools to do that. And of course, something that we will be talking a lot about in this AgMIP9 is the science policy interface. So that's another reason why we want to strengthen this interface. We need to really go ahead and make progress. So to account for all these aspects, we in the FAO have been trying to develop what we call a policy optimization modeling approach. And I want to explain very quickly what is that, just to see the advantages of doing something that, we put it in front of the policymakers, and then that policy science interface start working very well. So in this approach, what we do is we combine multi-criteria decision-making tools with CG modeling, with computable generative modeling. We put those things together. And here, basically, we start working with concrete policy objectives that can be weighted. We can weight these policy objectives. You can think about many policy objectives here, depending on where you are coming from, what angle you are doing the modeling for. And some of these objectives, of course, can be conflicting, and that creates trade-offs and so on and so forth. Here, we also need to work with clear policy instruments, and I will show some examples about that, but also bounds on these policy instruments. Some things cannot be just be left freely to jump from one percentage to the other. We also work with government financing mechanisms. It's not obvious that investments take place if you don't really account for how they are financed. And the way you finance investments also create a bunch of trade-offs. So we are taking those into account as well. And of course, we are taking into account all the restrictions that you impose when you work with multi-sectoral economy-wide modeling approaches. Now, this framework, what it's allowing the FAO to do is it's allowing us to support policymakers to improve on their policy objectives, what they prioritize, considering how they want to prioritize them, which may not be the best thing to do. It could be a second best or a third best, but we take into account what they prefer. This framework also helps us identify what we call an ideal or utopian solution that is only a point of reference for us to work with. So the policymaker, for example, may have the ideal or the utopian solution of reduce poverty to zero or zero hunger. Those are things that we call the ideal solutions. And then, of course, what we do here is to find a solution as close as possible to the ideal solution, given all the constraints that we are imposing in the system. And finally, we arrive at the best possible compromise that allows to improve on several policy objectives while considering all the restrictions. Now, just how this works is very simple. Let me put it very simple here. We have, for those who are familiar with this terminology, a loss function, where you have all the different policy objectives. So we have been here including, for example, some agricultural transformation objectives, maximization of GDP in the agri-food system, minimization of rural poverty, maximization of rural off-farm employment. And we have recently also added the cost of the healthy diet, of which we already spoke about. And we are now working on adding more objectives, like, for example, minimizing the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. Now, let me just highlight 3 things here. We have a loss function where we have weights, so you can weight these policy objectives. And the key feature here is that we engage with the policy makers to come up with the weights that they would like us to work with. So sometimes they may give more priority to one objective versus the other. So that's a very important thing. The second very important thing is that here, our policy instruments are all endogenously generated by the system. So we are moving from the tradition where you have policy instruments that are exogenously chalked to do simulations. So here, all those things are endogenously and also bounded, of course. And then you have this loss function subject to that set of endogenously determined policy objectives, policy instruments to pursue those objectives. And you have this loss function subject to all the equations in a dynamic recursive model. Now, my 2 last slides just show results so that you have a picture of what we're talking about here. So this is, for example, the project in Ethiopia, projected to 2025. And so here you have the budget by investment area. So you have fertilizers, extension, and so on and so forth in year 2025 under business as usual. Then you have the same budget by commodity. And then we just have here 2 scenarios where you optimize that budget. So that policy instrument that is separated by investment area and commodities, is endogenously generated in this optimization approach. And what you can see is that, in a scenario 1 where you optimize for agri-food GDP, for rural farm employment, and you minimize rural poverty, your same money is spent differently. So you have a different composition of your budget here. The same thing at the commodity level. Now, if you add the objective of minimizing the cost of healthy diets, then you can see that the budget changes again, depending on how many objectives you add. So here, for example, you will have more expenditure in irrigation for non-cereals, or more expenditure in vegetables. So now, why is this important? This is important because what we are, while we are doing this with the policymakers to understand how they want to weight objectives, we are also showing them the potential of working with optimal policies. This last slide shows that with the very same budget, if you optimize with this framework, you have huge potential gains to have with exactly the same money. So we are talking here about, millions as well. For example, in 4 countries where we are starting to work with policymakers, you can see that you can reduce poverty by almost 1.5 million people in those 4 countries with the same money, but working with optimal policies. You can also get almost to 6 million people affording a healthy diet with the same money, just because you are optimizing the budget. So this is just to pass the message that, there is a lot to be done in modeling. So one of the areas where we think, we need to improve is precisely in showing the policymakers how to do some policies much better when they have an optimal approach. Thank you very much. And for any consultation, there is some literature that we can also share with you on this. Thank you very much.
I appreciate.
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing. Just to make it easy.
Are there any questions? Oops, we're running a little bit out of time. Apologies. Are there any questions in the audience for the speakers?
Hello, good morning. I'm Ron Sands from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This session is on integrated assessments, and a lot of these models go out into the future, several decades into the future. So my main question is, how is future agricultural productivity handled, or how do you think about it? It's not easy to do. But on the energy side, we have some sense of what things have changed over the past couple of decades, technologies that will push productivity into the future. Any thoughts on how to model that, even without climate change?
That's between -60 and +60, right? No, I think the key challenge is, beside what I've described in the slides that I've addressed, is to project management changes, and like how do production systems change rather than how does environmental conditions change that kind of determine the performance of the system. There we are really just starting, like modeling changes in systems, like in fertilizer input, growing seasons, tillage systems, all that. Like how can we model it? How can we put it into the future and not just do like these counterfactual? Everyone does no tillage. Everyone does unlimited fertilizer. So that's a challenge, and I think that's also a challenge to AgMIP because it's so multidisciplinary, and we need to work on that jointly. There's some background noise, like some soccer game in the background.
Okay. Thank you for this question, and I will make some complementary because when we are communicated agricultural scenarios with the scientists from agriculture sector instead of modelers, actually they will always strengthen a question is the development of agriculture itself. Because agriculture is also under the development, there are some technology developments and for example, the livestock system are changing, the crop system are also changing. So I think if we are doing the long-term scenarios, the technology change of agriculture sector is also be very important for informing policymakers about the future change. Maybe this change is very important in China because you may notice that for livestock breeding activities there, we have very intensive systems in China. For example, very huge system confined in very limited land. So that will, if the agriculture going this way, that's actually will bring about a lot of questions. But if we adopted the BAU scenarios for that, then there will be a great bias for future projections. So I think the technology change itself for the sector itself will play a very important role too. So that's my some reflections.
Hello? Yeah, so I just want to add on what Christoph said, and yeah, nutrients are really important. I want to give an example on some results that were reported by the low input group yesterday, where they were showing that climate change impacts are really important, but also nutrients effect on crop productivity. So it will be good to really consider this in the future and see, and particularly now that we are talking about conservation, agriculture, and things like that, less impact on environment, high productivity. It's good to somehow capture the nicely, well, see how the nutrients affect productivity, even under current and future climate change. Yeah. Thank you.
I want to add one more comment. As a crop modeler, I'm always very worried about the inputs we use for our crop models for projecting to 2050 and 2100. And what we see in the literature is what I call the dumb farmer approach. We assume that farm management in 2050 is the same as in 2023. And the most challenging part of what we do is really understanding on how our stakeholders make decisions, how our farmers make decisions. And they are not interested in what's happening in 2050 because their livelihoods are at stake in the poorer countries as well as the United States, etc. So we don't really know how a farmer will change his management practice in the future, and that's something I don't think we can model. Yesterday we missed a presentation on mental models, but it's something we need to address much more, is what our future farming systems are going to look like from a farmer's and stakeholders perspective, not from a biophysical perspective.
Yeah, thanks. Herman Lotzekamp from PIC and AgMIP Exco. I have a comment and one question to Marco. A general comment. I mean, Gary, part of the adaptation measures are, of course, taken up in the economic models, but I see a different problem. I mean, based on Christoph's presentation, but also the others, I think we have to find a smart way between the aggregate results we are getting and then the disaggregated results. I mean, even if at the aggregate level, we do not see a strong signal or even positive effects. This doesn't mean that at any particular region or for any particular group of farmers or in the population, there may still be strong impacts. And this reaches out to this aspect of equity and inequality. So I think we need to find a way more towards a risk perspective and being clear about, okay, we have to have the aggregate results, that's for sure, but we also have to kind of keep in mind and reflect well the distributional effects and what are the potentially worst outcomes for the poorest people affected. So do this at the same time, right? I mean, keeping the aggregate level while also acknowledging, if we can, the distributional aspects and what's the robustness, what's our confidence in saying something about distributed or regional or disaggregated effects, especially negative effects, right? I mean, we may not care too much about the positive effects. Okay, fine, if we get away with that, but how much do we know about the downside risks? And this goes also the way of aggregating across crops and so on. Well, I don't know, this is a comment to all of the modelers. Marco, I have one question. This is really interesting. For many years, we talked about the national level, the country level modeling. Just out of interest, how many countries are you covering with this modeling approach? You showed examples for 4 countries. If you have more, I think this would be really interesting to link up with as an intermediate layer, also in AgMIP, between the models with global coverage. And then we also always had the sub-national regional assessments with Tom Entel's teams, but the national level was lacking. So I think this could be a nice complementary approach. It would be good to explore that. Thank you.
May I go ahead and answer? Just
Can you answer, Marco?
Yes, sure. I'm happy to do so. No, I mean, let me just touch upon the 2 points. The question, just to answer the last question, our monitoring and analyzing food and agricultural policies program focuses on Sub-Saharan Africa. As such, we are now trying to deploy this modeling approach in about 8 Sub-Saharan African countries. And most recently, we are going to start doing this in Bangladesh, which is going to be very interesting, considering the type of country Bangladesh is. But this is something that we actually like to partner with partners and scale up, because I think the power of showing policymakers what they are missing with the same money, and if they can report their policies, is huge. Now, I agree also with your comment and question for everybody. One of the things we are focusing on now a lot, it's of course showing the national effects of policies or changes or futures that we simulate is very important. But we have understood that, you know, bringing a human face to the modeling results is very important. So if you take, for example, charts that we can play around with on adaptation, potential adaptation policies, or if you simulate, you know, the variability in climate, we are trying to show, you know, how many people you are actually helping prevent to lose livelihoods, right? Because they are adapting, or there is a policy that will help them to cope. We are showing numbers of people who would be lifted out of poverty if something happens in the system. We are showing number of people who cannot afford a healthy diet now, but could afford it if something is happening. So I think that this I call it the bringing some human face to the modeling results is very important. No matter what we are simulating with a crop model, you should bring the farmer's face there. You know, with climate models, with economic models. I think that if we want to, you know, strengthen the science policy interface, we need to start talking about the people, the results in terms of people. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. For a matter of time, I know Alex really favors the coffee break. We're 5 minutes over time, so I really appreciate the audience for asking the question, and I especially appreciate the panel members for providing your brief presentations. I encourage you to talk to the panel members, at least the ones in person, if you have any further questions. So thank you so much.